I really wonder if Jamie Newman regrets some of the decisions he's made over the past year. I wonder if he would sit there and say to himself, I want to take this last year back and have a do-over. Maybe not necessarily the decision to transfer from Wake Forest and go to Georgia, because in theory that should have been a really sensible step to take, a really sensible move. Like, you want to get away from Wake Forest and the ACC and get to a more high-profile program on a larger platform, larger scale like Georgia, playing in the SEC, and thinking to yourself, hey, man, I'm going to get a chance to really shine here and, potentially show my NFL wares. And then COVID and the whole pandemic thing happens and he decides to opt out of the 2020 season. You wonder if he regrets it. You wonder. And he may not. And I will say at the end of the day, like, everything seems to happen for a reason. Like, is it important to not live life with regrets? There may be things you want to go back and say you wish you would have done differently, but it could also be a learning experience. But at the end of the day, if he feels content and happy with this decision, like, it may be whatever it is. Like, it's cool for him. And I wonder, like, how much this is really going to impact his draft stock at all. Because when you think about Jamie Newman, like, as much as people talk about, like, Trey Lance and, hey, he didn't get much of a 2020 season, well, Jamie Newman didn't either. And it's a really complicated evaluation because, Jamie Newman is raw, like way more raw than a Trey Lance. You maybe don't think of him that way, but he absolutely was. And then that critical season that could have done a lot to either expose him and his flaws even more or show that he grew and improved on his flaws and that he was potentially a top-tier quarterback talent in this draft. It didn't happen. So now you're sitting there going back and watching stuff in 2019 and trying to grade a guy in 2021 and say, this guy didn't even play football for a year. Like, what the hell are you supposed to do with this? And it's quarterback, like that peak year of his development, and it wasn't there. I think it's an interesting question. At least I will say this. To me, as you start thinking about rounds 3 and later in the draft, you're looking at a couple of different things, regardless of position. You could be looking at guys that you think are really great system fits, that provide good value based off of where you're drafting them, that you say maybe they have 1 or 2 traits that are less than ideal, but they do so many other things well you think they have a chance to make it. Or you're gambling on that high upside athlete that has those physical tools and skills like a first rounder, but either needs work or they were inconsistent, they're very raw, they're newer to the game and experience, whatever the case might be, and you're saying to yourself, those are the types of guys you want to take a swing on and gamble on sometimes because they have the chance if they develop and grow and you have confidence in your system and that prospect's ability to develop and grow, they have a chance to vastly outplay their draft position. And that's also true. And I think Jamie Newman certainly fits into that second category in the sense of, like, he's a guy that has projectable traits. He is a guy that absolutely has physical tools that should be leading to him getting drafted somewhere in the middle of this draft. The hell with him not playing in 2020. Like, don't overthink this too much. He needs work, and he's going to need time. And there's no guarantee that he ever fulfills this potential. Like, he could have just been a Dick Tease. And you have plenty of guys at quarterback and other positions that are like that. But, if you start talking about Jamie Newman guy, unless there's something else that we don't know about medicals or off the field or anything, like, you start talking about him as a late day 3 pick or something like that, that just seems insane. He's got really good size for the position, again, built to hold up well. He's got a pretty strong arm. It's not the strongest in this draft, but it's a strong one. He has more than enough arm talent, sufficient arm strength to make all the required NFL throws. And when you take that, with that size, that pure arm talent that is there, and you combine that with a really, really great athletic package, like this is one of the better athletes at the quarterback position in this draft. This is one of the best scramblers. This is one of the best runners. One of the more mobile and agile quarterbacks in this draft. Like, you can at least look at him and you say, there are absolutely projectable physical tools. There's no question about it. He's got more than enough arm strength. He would come into the league and be in the top 10 to 12 in terms of strongest arms in the league, most likely. Same thing when you talk about the mobility and athleticism standpoint. Probably top 10 to 12 quarterback in the league. And I'm probably underselling it a little bit. I could be, but trying to paint the picture of when you're talking about, excuse me, traits and projectable tools for the next level, he has them. And you could have envisioned if Jamie Newman went to Georgia and played the 2020 season and had a good year, like the whole narrative about him and frankly some of his draft class may have changed significantly. You might not be talking about a Mac Jones being a top 10 or 15 quarterback, overall pick in this draft, because you look at him and you look at a Jamie Newman and you'd be like, yeah, Jamie Newman, he's still got some work to do, but damn, his physical tools are so much better. Like, what's the upside with a Mac Jones type versus this guy's got all types of upside? And yeah, like I totally understand. So that lack of ability to play in 2020 killed him. It may have saved him a little bit too, though, because if he went to Georgia and he laid a fucking egg, he might have been undrafted. But there's a little bit of mystery about him because teams are going to sit there and say, hey, is this a good young man? Is this somebody with these projectable traits and skills that we think we can develop and make something out of? And somebody, I think, is going to see that somewhere in the middle of this draft. Because he's going to need work. I want to be clear on that. His ball placement was average to below average pretty consistently, like throughout the 2019 season. A lot of one read and run type of plays. He showed a little bit of ability at times to go through progressions, throw with a little bit of anticipation, but I certainly would not call it like big time NFL level preparedness in that space. Tended to be, in terms of the pocket, like he showed some nice movement skills in order to be able to recognize the pressure and kind of side shift and move up within the pocket, back and around in the pocket a little bit, buy himself a little time. But there were also plenty of times where you're looking at him from a pocket presence and decision-making standpoint. He'd be slow to react, like that's a concern, or he would sit there and bail out too quickly. So the decision-making mechanism certainly needs some work there for him. But I really think, like, when you talk about Jamie Newman, the most striking thing is his mechanics. Now, when you look at him mechanically, he's very similar to Cam Newton. Cam Newton used to come back, he still does, like he comes back and he's behind himself and he really cocks and cranks that shoulder. And then when you think in your head, and you see this if you go and watch Jamie Newman in 2019, I guarantee you'll look at it when he goes into his throwing motion, you're thinking, hey, the ball is out. No, it actually isn't. And you think, and I say that to say, you think sometimes when he's throwing he's throwing the ball 50 yards downfield, and you realize with all that windup, he only threw it 25 yards down the field. And that's a concern, that's a problem, because while he's got a strong arm, yes, the flaws in those mechanics that he has, similar to a Cam, can lead to taking sacks that you don't need to take because you don't get rid of the ball as quickly. It's going to lead to situations where your accuracy is kind of scatterball and all over the place. Now, for a guy like a Cam Newton, it wasn't always as important. Like, even when he was at Auburn, I never envisioned Cam Newton being a top-flight accurate passer in the league. That wasn't his game. Again, if you remember me way back then, like if you followed me back in the day, a decade ago, can't believe it's been that long, but I talked about the fact, like, this guy could make some big-time NFL throws, and he's not getting enough credit for that. He doesn't make some of the basic throws, but he can make some of the big-time special throws, and those are going to matter more. You don't draft a Cam Newton to dink and dunk. You draft a Cam Newton because you want to be an explosive, big-time playmaker as a runner and as a thrower. You throw more down the field. You challenge defenses more vertically. Naturally, your completion percentage is going to be lower, but also your potential for big plays and field position, game-changing, momentum-changing things happening is greater. And I see a Jamie Newman similar in that sense to a degree. I don't think his arm is as strong as Pete Cam's was. Like, Cam's arm is washed now. His shoulder's shot, and all that long release does, it just looks terrible because he doesn't have the pop or zip anymore. Jamie Newman has the pop or zip, but I feel like you could get a whole lot more out of it if he didn't bring the ball back behind his damn head. And I don't know, like, in terms of actual game action, if he's going to have that fixed in 2021. Like, even for you guys that will sit there and say, well, he showed this on a pro day or did that on a pro day, he didn't change it or didn't change that. Like, at the end of the day, that's all nice and good, but what happens when you get pressure? What happens when things start coming at you fast in the league? Do you regress and go back to previous habits? In a clean, sterile type of environment, like, sure, you can look like you've made an improvement, but that doesn't actually mean that's the case. He's got to get better on his mechanics. Because when you take some of the slow processing, the inconsistency in terms of the speed of processing and recognition and reaction in his decision making and his field of vision, and you take that and combine that with that long loping throwing motion coming behind his head, you're going to run into a lot of problems where he's going to see windows that are there, but by the time he gets held rid of the ball, they're not there anymore. And you're really minimizing your arm strength. Like, you'd like to see him, bring it up into a position and shorten his motion a little bit. It would actually allow more of his natural arm strength to come through. Also think it's easier for him when you're trying to throw on the move. You potentially need to throw from different launch angles with your arm. Like, I think there's more upside there, but he's got to fix these mechanics. Because it's these mechanics combined with these other things that are really going to kill him. Now, if you get those fixed, you're talking about physically, at least physically, a guy that holds up to any quarterback in this draft damn near. And you're talking about a guy that if you start saying, hey, he's improved his mechanics, which means he improved his accuracy a little bit, means he gets rid of the ball a little quicker. As a result, it helps him in terms of his processing because he's not trying to account for that big long loping throwing motion anymore. He recognizes a little quicker and reacts a little quicker because he's a little more confident because he knows it's not going to take him as long to get rid of the ball. And you start piecing together little improvements here and there. And you're talking about a guy that has starter potential in this league. He absolutely does. And I think a perfect comparison for him is somebody like a David Garrard. David Garrard, coming out of ECU, was, I believe, a fourth-round pick going back in the early 2000s. Keep me honest there in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think he was a fourth-round pick. He was a guy that he was never like a superstar or special, but he was a guy that had enough physical traits at the quarterback position, even with some of the flaws, like eventually he worked on them and improved upon them, and became, for a few years, a solid starter in the league. I personally think that Jamie Newman has a little more physical and athletic upside than a David Garrard, but I don't think it's a bad comparison because there is some similarity there in terms of some of the flaws that they had in their game, taking some time and needing some work and development, but having that upside to be a starter in the league. I think that's what Jamie Newman can be, and he could be potentially a little bit better than that. But it's all going to come down to where does he go, who does he work with, what type of system. Like, I look at somebody like a Washington football team, honestly, in the middle of the draft, and I say, this should be a young man that they target. Lots of teams. You can say that about the Bears and many others, but I say specifically, like if I look at Jamie Newman, I say, well, all those years Ron Rivera had a pretty good relationship with Cam Newton. Like, here's a similar situation. Young athletic quarterback with some mechanical flaws, like being able to get the most out of him, being able to being comfortable with, maybe he's not the most accurate thrower, but he can make some big plays happen down the field. Like, I don't necessarily see that as a bad fit. So I've put a third-round grade on Jamie Newman. He was one of those guys coming into 2020. I was really hoping to see what he could do because I thought there was a lot more potential there. But you have to kind of hedge your bets here. There's a very good chance that he busts out and doesn't do much. He's one of those guys that gets drafted in the fourth round or something, and he's out of the league in 4 or 5 years. That could happen. He could also be one of those guys we look back on 4 or 5 years, you find this video and you say, well, shit, you were wrong, son, about him. He ended up being a stud in the league. I want to be clear, like, he absolutely could be. The physical talent and upside is there. It's just incredibly risky to take him with anything more than a third-round pick because he didn't play in a year and he has some major significant flaws that you're going to have to work on and develop and be patient with because it's going to take time.